Okay, yeah, I should get through this plenty with plenty of time to spare that there. I'll probably keep it a little relatively short today because, uh, and that'll probably be the case on most Mondays. As I mentioned earlier, I had the stroke 4 months ago, and my energy level is not that there. You know, my neurologist kind of jokes that people that have had strokes, everyone thinks they're lazy because they like to take naps. And to be honest, 3 o'clock is my normal nap time at there. So I'll probably finish this class and go home. Normally, I would go home and take a nap, but unfortunately, my wife is in the hospital having surgery today or tomorrow. So I mean, two old people, just should never get sick at the same time. And she was supposed to have the surgery back in April. That they're the third, fourth week of April on her shoulder. She's got a pinched ligament in her shoulder, and unfortunately, when I had my stroke, and I couldn't drive and I couldn't get out of bed, and various other things, and I had to be pushed around in a wheelchair for a short while. It wouldn't have worked for her to go get shoulder surgery. But now that I'm about 75% recovered and I'm allowed to drive again, she went ahead and scheduled her surgery. So tomorrow I won't be on campus at all because of surgery up there. So I started the recording. So the recording of the class is somewhat not known as I record, because the computer actually just records the screen and my voice. I turn the camera off. I have in the past turned the camera on when I've recorded courses, and the students all told me that they didn't want to see my face because, one, probably because the face doesn't look good, and the other is that they're more interested in what's on the screen right there. So, right there. Okay, the first thing is I'm going to go through some slides, but let me just kind of point out, and let me go ahead. I think I got internet in this room here. I got something on my screen here, right there. Oh, wrong university. Right there. I still got links to other universities on my side. Right there, and I'm waiting. Actually, it's right there. Okay, this is the e-learning site for this class. Maybe. Why is my... Well, supposedly the e-learning is supposed to be there. Why is it not coming up? Okay, students. Right there. And okay, so this is the e-learning site for this class, and I'm hoping that most of you are familiar with e-learning right there. And you just click on that there, and right there. And of course, this is the instructor's version right there, right here. So this is the textbook right there. Now this is a copyrighted book that I downloaded that there, and that there. So, don't share it on the internet with the whole world, although it's on the internet for the whole world to find anyway. That there. If you went to buy this book at, what's the MPH, or what's the one there at KLCC, there's a big bookstore there that sells a lot of textbooks out there. It's probably 300-400 ringgits. It's probably an expensive book out there. So, out there. And, yeah, well, so it's there, and Also there, and I have the first 5 weeks of the slides right there. I tried putting them up individually, but the VLE just would, when I clicked on it, it would just say, so there's a zip file that comes down, and it says it's going to open in 35 minutes, so we're not going to wait for that right there. But you can download it on your own right there. So all the slides that I'm going to be using, you know, I didn't write them; they came from the publisher, so I may not agree with all of them, but I'm going to use the publisher slides to go with the book. It just makes my life easier, right there. And that there. So I'll be starting that there. All your homework assignments will be posted on here, and you'll submit all your homework through here. So you'll submit a copy of the C program you write, along with a screenshot of what your, you know, the output or whatever files right there, your output that there. So, and I'll show you how to capture the, you know, a session. You know, basically just take a screenshot of running the program. I don't want to take any hard copies of homework, simply because, one, things get lost. I don't have an office here, although I'm supposed to move into the office across the hall. Dr. Tyrell's been trying to get me to move for 6 months over to an office, and especially since a stroke, because there's enough of these things in our office area that I can trip on, where it's a little safer if I'm off the main hallway. So all the homework will come in through that there. So I set up a YouTube or a Facebook page for this class. I think a group that I've been using it for most of my classes, because the VLE has been somewhat flaky at times, but I'm not a Facebook person, to be honest with you. You know, I'm not. I don't like Facebook but well, I have not set up one for this class yet, and I don't know if I'm going to. But the only advantage of the Facebook one is that I find that students tend to keep their Facebook on far more often than they check the VLE. So I think I'll go ahead and set up one for here. I may not put assignments up on it or the videos up on there. I may use the VLE for that. But what I will use it for is, you see in this class here, I put the lectures, links to them out there, and you know, there's a couple lectures. But things like, if there's no class, I like to announce it on Facebook, because that there. So let me just go back here and just go ahead and do a group for this class, and then you can hunt for me. I got 2 pages. You want to look for the picture of me with the purple shirt on, or with the drawing that there. Let me just go ahead and groups. If I can remember how to do a group. Create group right there. And the name of this group is Computer Programming and MATLAB. And I'm going to put July 2017 right there. And just ask to be added to the group. You have to find me and ask to be added to the group, and I add you to the group right there. And I have to add one person. But so I add myself. Right there is what I do. My other Facebook page that I never use for anything, but yeah, but that's not right. Yeah, that's good enough. I haven't used that email in years, but evidently I found it that there. Okay. And we'll just stick American football there. Okay, so Hopefully it showed up. There it is. Okay. So don't do it now, but after class, just go ahead and ask me. Just do a search on my email address, scott@unikl.edu.my, and you'll find me, and then you can find the group there and get added. It's a closed group, so if you're not added, you won't be seen. And that's where I'll put any announcements. In particular, this Wednesday, because my wife's surgery is tomorrow. If anything goes on, I'm planning on being here on Wednesday, but we never know. So, all right, that's it. With all that kind of said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to go through some of the first chapter in the book slides. May as well just jump right in there. And again, these slides are available on the VLE for the first 5 weeks, right there. So, right there. Now, I normally slideshow right there from beginning. Actually, if I hit F5, let's see. Oh, my pen works in this room. I've just discovered that some of the projectors, my pen doesn't work very well with right there. So this is introductions. Chapter 1 is introduction to computers, the internet, and the web. That there, even though the internet and the web is not part of the course, they're part of the engineer's toolbox. They're definitely part of the student's toolbox. I mean, we use the web and the internet for all kinds. That there, unfortunately, too many people, if they're asked to write a lab report, they go to the internet, they find a discussion with it, they cut and paste it, and I've discovered when I ask, what's the definition of a term, and they give me a term from a Indian legal page, because the abbreviation happens to be the same as some group in India. That there. So if you're going to cut and paste from the internet, make sure that what you're cutting and pasting is actually related to the topic you're going to cut and paste. But you shouldn't cut and paste anyway. You should read it and rephrase it in your own wording. That there. So that there. So, but the slides are for version 8 of the book. Version 7 is the one I've uploaded online. So the slides and the book may not correspond 100%, but textbooks are generally updated every year or so because the publishers want to update them. The material that I'm going to be teaching in this class, Introduction to C, has not changed drastically in probably 20 years. I mean, the language itself has not changed very much. C++, of course, is an addition. I taught this class once with C++, and it was too confusing for most of the students up there. And the other reason is, and this is not in this chapter, but I want to talk about it beforehand. 90% of the work I've done in C has been in the area of embedded microprocessors and embedded systems. That's my area over the last number of years. Back when I was at Magnavox, back when it was a government contractors, they've since sold off and they're now part of Raytheon, the group I'm in, and British Undersea, Ultra Undersea Systems bought actually the department that I was working for. And we made systems for the U.S. Navy for tracking submarines, back in the Cold War when we were interested in knowing where all the submarines were. So I've never been on a submarine, but I designed hardware and worked on hardware to hunt for them. Right there, during the Cold War, and I'll mention military electronics from time to time because it's the background of the part of the city that I lived in, or the city I lived in before. A lot of our graduates went to work for the defense aerospace industry. So that's the area which I'm most familiar with. Most of the instructors in UniKL are more familiar with power electronics or power or electrical systems, generators, transmission lines, distribution systems. I have no clue about that, nor do I care about that. All I care about is that I have a plug with electricity in it and I can plug my computer into it. But of course that makes them up. But that's 90% of the people. I work more on the area of what do we do with the with electronics for So, and I've worked on projects other than submarine tracking equipment. You know, I've also worked on some weapons guidance systems for anti-tank guns back in the early days. I haven't done any of that work in 20 plus years. Probably 30 years since I've worked on anything dealt with weapons. I don't like working on weapons. That's kind of a moral issue with me. But hunting submarines I was okay with. Well, I mean, because submarines carry nuclear weapons, we want to know where they're at. And a lot of people wonder why the U.S. was so worried about where all the Russian submarines were, or Soviet submarines, and that's because they carry nuclear weapons. Just like American submarines carry nuclear weapons. That's why the Russians are so interested in knowing where the American submarines are. So it's a cat and mouse game. Yeah. And if you're ever interested in it, there's a movie out called Hunt for Red October. Has anybody ever seen that movie? It's a very interesting movie. If you ever, I was interested because I worked in the Sonnebuoy, DIFAR areas, which we track submarines, and a lot of that technology is discussed in that movie. So, but Sean Connery stars in it. And it was back in the 90s, I think, or even the late 80s it came out. But regardless, I worked on washing machines. I've worked on potato crisp manufacturing equipment for sorting potatoes, good potatoes from bad potatoes, which deals with a lot of optical processing. I've dealt with sorting green tomatoes from red tomatoes, and I've worked with heating and air conditioning systems as far as thermostats and equipment controls. I've done a little bit of early automation, robotic type work, but not much in the last 20 years. I've worked on systems that track the submarine or sun for solar energy. So I've worked on a lot of things that, if you can stick a processor in it, I worked on it typically. So I'm very familiar with the 8051 processor, the 8085. These are Intel processors. Most of my work has been with Intel processors. I've done some work with PICs. I've done some work with a company called Silicon Labs, which makes a clone of the 8051. More recently, I've been playing a lot with the Raspberry Pi and the ARM processors. So I'm a processor person. I deal with the hardware side of computers and not the design of desktop computers. And definitely not the design of desktop software for word processors or web pages or spreadsheets or any of that. Accounting systems. I worked once on a college registration system, for scheduling classrooms and that kind of stuff. I hated it. I also worked on a database for a company for billing, and hated it. It was fun work at the time, and it paid good money. I mean, I have to admit that most of these jobs I did it for income. And even while I was teaching, I probably almost always worked 15, 20 hours a week for industry doing some kind of industrial project. So I've got a lot of industrial background in the embedded processor world. Very little in the desktop programming world or the database world right there. I had to do a little bit of desktop programming with a system we did it was done for the court system for keeping track of alcoholic drivers that were arrested for drunk driving. We put a breathalyzer in the car, and we had to keep track of every time they got in the car, how far they drove, what their blood alcohol level was, and that had to be uploaded into a database in order to produce a report for the judge to determine whether or not to renew their driver's license. So I've had to delve a little bit into the database world in that area, but I'm not a database person. So, all right. With that said, let me just kind of go on. So that's my background. The author of the book is completely the opposite. He wouldn't know a microcontroller or a microprocessor if it came up and bit him in the butt. I'm sorry to say, he's a great programmer. He writes good books, and the ability of being a good programmer and being a good writer is a very difficult thing to find. Most programming books are horribly written. Okay. In this chapter, we're going to talk a little bit about the basic computer concepts, the different types of programming, the history of C, the standard library, object technology, which we won't talk much about. That gets in more to C++. The programming environment, we'll talk about that in more detail on Wednesday. He uses something called Visual Studio, and I love Visual Studio, but Visual Studio is quite mahagila. It's expensive to buy and license it. So UniKL happens to run a shareware version of a C compiler that is not exactly the same as what the book says. And actually that's what got me in trouble when I was using C++, because there's C++ and Visual Studio C++ had some major differences. And then how to test drive that, and we're going to skip that for now and right there, because to test drive a C application in Windows, Linux, and Mac OS, right there. If you look around, we don't have any Macs in this room, so we're not going to worry about writing anything for Macs. I've got a little Mac Mini that I use for testing. That there. It's kind of it's a nice little computer, don't get me wrong. It's about this big. I mean, it's a small little computer. You just plug an HDMI monitor and a keyboard. It's actually not a bad little computer, but it's there. But it's not what I call the, my main development system is considerably larger. So, okay. This is kind of the outline for the course. I'm not going to discuss it in great detail because I'll spend all the time talking about the outline and not have nothing to talk about when I get to the slides themselves. So here they are, right there. Okay, the core of this book emphasizes effective software engineering through proving that there. Okay, that's just what he says is that we're going to be looking at software engineering. That there, and there are ways of writing programs for. And by the way, he did simply say that you could go to that. I don't know if that website's good to get to download the sample programs. All the programs that are there are available on that. Again, this slide is available. Software is a set of instructions, right there. I'll pick on the ladies first. We don't have very many of you, and you're all in the back of the room, so I can't look at it. But if you bake a cake, for example, you have a recipe, right? And a recipe is a set of instructions on how you bake the cake. You've got the ingredients, you have to assemble them a certain way and in the correct order. Same thing with guys. You're going to you're going to take the motor off your motorcycle and put a new motor on, right? And either someone's taught you how to do that, or you found a book on how to do that, or you found a YouTube video on how to do that. But there's a set of instructions on the proper way to remove the motor and put it back together again. If you just grab a series of spanners and wrenches and screwdrivers and just start taking it apart and slap the new motor on, what are the odds are that the new one's going to work? You go through that there. And these are that there. And that's what software is. It's a series of instructions that there. So that controls computers, often referred to the hardware. Now you'll hear the term software and hardware used a lot. That there. I live in a world called firmware, which is somewhere in between. Embedded systems, you typically have the instructions and you put them onto a PROM, or they're permanently placed on the processor system. That there. So the term firmware is in between the two of them. We'll get into that. He probably doesn't talk much about firmware because he doesn't live in the firmware world. I've lived a lot there. So computers can perform calculations and make logical decisions faster than humans. That is so true. A computer can add up 500 numbers and find its average in about 1/10 of a millisecond. Very, very quick. If you were to do that with a calculator, that would probably take you 10 minutes, right? That's it. So computers can perform billions of calculations in a second. That's, again, they've gotten much quicker. There are supercomputers out there that can compute so fast and so quickly, it just blows that they're, you just can't do that. And one of the things that computers can do better than anything else is can do what they call data mining. They can go through large amounts of data looking for patterns, looking for information. In companies like Google and or what's now called Alphabet, I keep calling them Google, but Google is now a division under Alphabet, and Yahoo and Facebook. When you start posting stuff on Facebook, you have to believe that Facebook doesn't give you that really nice Facebook page for nothing. They want to know about you so they can sell your information to other people. That's called data mining, and that there. So, they want to know what type of cars you drive, who your friends are, what type of places you shop at. If you look at there's a program out there, it's really fun. It drives me crazy, and I should uninstall it. Right there. I think it's Yelp or one of those that recommends restaurants. I can't remember which one it is. And you install it on your phone and you use it once in a while. But every now and then my phone will pop up and ask me to review some restaurant that I'd been to because it accesses my GPS and knows where I've been. That's there. And that particular company is keeping track of what restaurants and malls I go to in order to sell my information to advertisers. So privacy is one of the things that we've lost in the 21st century, right there. So, but the way computers work is they have computer programs, and these computer programs are written by programmers. Now, a software engineer or a computer engineer and a programmer are different job descriptions, and an information technology specialist is a different that there. Programmers are programmers out there, and to be honest with you, I hate being a programmer. I probably worked a year or two out of college, and I did nothing but write programs, and it was not a very pleasant job. I prefer the embedded systems where I design a little hardware, then I write some software to drive the hardware, then I test it, I fine-tune the software, I tweak the hardware, and I'm going back and forth between the hardware and the firm and the software. I prefer that type of work. If you ask me to sit down and write software for Google on how to, do web searches and things like that, I probably would have shot myself in the hand a long time ago, so I didn't have to type anymore. And then, now I'm struggling to get my typing skills back out there. So, but engineers do find themselves doing some programming. One of the things that a manager that hired me for a consulting job, it was a summer consulting job back when I first started teaching, I was working with a company called Navistar that, believe it or not, builds 18-wheel tractors. You've seen the big 18-wheel trucks out there, but they design trucks to go on the road. And you wouldn't believe how much computing power is in some of those trucks out there. There's a lot of computers crammed into those truck tractors right there. And I was doing some work with them, and it was testing, the truck tractor. And one of the things that he told me, and I later in my career discovered that he was right, it's easier to teach a engineer how to program than it is to teach a programmer how to think like an engineer. So as a result, a lot of you, even though you're not programmers and you don't think you're ever going to be programming, you may find yourself having to write some programs because the programmer can't think of the equations and the relationships that you need as well as you do as the engineer. So you may end up writing some software, some programs yourself. And that's why everyone takes a course in programming, is that you're more likely to do programming than a programmer is to lay out the electrical fixtures in a building right there. So as a result, most engineers have some programming skills. Now I've got my oldest son actually does industrial automation. He started off as a programmer, and he found out that he had to become an engineer, and he had to go back to school to become an engineer. Working as a programmer in the company that he was at, his career was going to dead end. Matter of fact, it's most likely going to end, and he would be looking for another job. And he hated programming just like I did. So, but the programs that run on the computer are referred to the software, and the reason they're called software is because they're soft. You can change them. You can make minor changes. The devices connected to the computer are the hardware. Now, again, in my world, hardware can also refer to as a washing machine, right there. And the various relays and valves and the motors and everything and the transmission for the washing machine, that's all hardware that's controlled by the microprocessor, which is hardware, but the software drives all that. And I found that most engineers that end up working more in the software realm find themselves more drawn toward the firmware side. And that's what I call firmware, is that it's not really soft, but you have firmware updates. And all of you that have Android phones understand the concept of a firmware update, right? And, they download a new version of Android into your phone and then it reboots. Well, that's the operating system of the phone. It's programmed into a electronically erasable ROM on the program. We'll talk about what that means later in the course. So it's not soft in the fact that every time you turn the phone off or reset it, it's gone. It's always there. But most of our phones then, of course, have a bunch of programs that are stored in what they call solid state RAM in there. So, but we'll talk more about that. Computing programming costs are dropping drastically. I remember my first 1 gigabyte hard drive I bought. I didn't buy it. The U.S. Navy bought it. The U.S. Navy wanted us to keep track of all of our quality control data for our sonobuoy program, and we were automating all of our test equipment for testing the sonobuoys, and we needed a gigabyte hard drive to store all this information for reports for the Navy. The U.S. military probably taught Malaysia on how to be really, really hardcore about paperwork, right there. Malaysian universities compared to American universities have 20 times as much paperwork. I don't do most of the paperwork, that's why I'm always in trouble with that there. I remember sitting in a meeting and saying, Dr. Hack, it really isn't that much work as you pointing to a stack of paperwork for one course. And I looked at that and it goes, I could condense that down to like 6 pages and it'd tell you everything you need to know. Well, the Navy required this stack of paperwork. But when I was working for Magnavox, we didn't want to create this much paperwork. So we wrote software programs that talked to the test equipment, and the software generated the paperwork. So we would give the Navy a stack of paperwork that was 4 inches, 5 inches, 6 inches thick. But we would generate that paperwork by hitting a button once a month, right there. And all the data was automatically collected from the floor. As the board went through a production station, it was scanned with a barcode reader. It was then hooked up to a computer that was tied to all the oscilloscopes and function generators, and we do all the tests. And we didn't write any of this paperwork by hand. Now, we had a lot of money up front in designing this equipment. But getting back to what I was saying is we bought this 1 gigabyte I keep saying terabyte, 1 gigabyte hard drive. And if you think how small a gigabyte is today, can you buy a 1 gigabyte drive? I think the smallest I see is probably about a 500, maybe. Thumb drives, the smallest I've seen is 2 gig, maybe 4 gig. And they're about as expensive as a 16 gig. I've got some. Most of my thumb drives are 32 or 64 gig. Right. This 1 gigabyte hard drive back in 1983, 82, somewhere in there, cost 30,000 USD. Now, if you throw in inflation, that would be about 100,000 USD today. And you look at the current exchange rate, that's the equivalent of 430,000 ringgits. Almost 500,000 ringgits for a single gigabyte hard drive. Right there. So that tells you how that there. Now, of course, we're talking 84, we'll say 82 just to make the math easy. You're talking 35 years ago. But you can see how much prices have dropped. Have cars dropped in price like that? Has anything hard dropped other than electronics? Now, televisions have. Computers have. That anything electrical has. Cell phones definitely have. Now, they've gotten more expensive because they do far more. But I remember the early cell phones, they called them bag phones. They carried them in a bag. That they didn't fit in your pocket. And they were 15,000 a piece. So, again, computers fill large rooms, cost millions of dollars. And again, you can say a Raspberry Pi has more horsepower on it for 100 ringgits than my IBM PC I bought when I first graduated from college. The IBM I bought back in 1984, I think it was. Again, we're talking over 30 years ago. Cost me $3,300 US. It came with 64K. Let's not talk G here. 64K of RAM. It came with 2 floppy drives. Hard drives weren't out yet. It had a 14-inch green monitor, but it was a graphics monitor, but it was a green monitor. There was no color to it. And that was $3,300, $1984. So that tells you what things are going. A current Raspberry Pi has 1 gigabyte of RAM. It has HDMI color graphics at 1080p graphics right there. It can read up to, I think it's a 256 gigabyte memory card, SD. Well, no, the new ones use micro SD, so I think they're limited to 128K or gig right there. It's got 4 USB ports, so you can put external hard drives on it there. It's got built-in Ethernet, wireless, Bluetooth, and it's about 110 ringgits right there. And I'll bring one of them and pass them around. I use them for my microcontroller class. Right. So again, we're looking at something that on the Raspberry Pi is about a 2 by 3 inch. I'll use inch because I'm more familiar. Their card. It's about this big by this big. It's about this big, about the size of a credit card. Right there. And it has more processing power than a desktop computer did 30 years ago. Right there. So there's something called Moore's Law. It's quoted a great deal. Gordon Moore was an early engineer. I don't remember what company he came from, but he co-founded Intel. Intel is still around. If you go up to Penang, you'll see quite a few buildings devoted to Intel. I think they may have changed their silicon name or something. They may have did a Motorola used to have a plant out in PJ. Now it's called Freescale. So a lot of these Motorola and Intel were the big chip manufacturers for many, many decades. Motorola changed its name to Freescale, and I think Intel might have changed its name. Don't quote me on that there. But the first microprocessor was the 4004. It was actually developed for a Japanese company, to make a calculator. And Intel determined that, hey, this can be used for other things. So 4 bits was a little small, so they came up with the 8008. Well, it never was still in development stage. He sold a few to the military. And then the 8080 was probably the first commercial processor that was made. And we're still using the basic architecture of the 8080 today. If you look at an i7 Skylake processor that goes into the top of the line computer system, it's still using the basic Intel architecture that was developed for the 8080 back in the 1960s. So the architecture hasn't changed. But Moore's law says that do the work. Okay, they don't quote Moore's law here. Moore's law basically says that computing power and storage space is going to double and half in price every 3 to 4 years. Right there. And Moore's law, even though it's not a scientific law, he's not a physicist or a mathematician, has held true since the 1960s. And everyone keeps saying that, you know, Moore's law is reached its limit and we can't get any faster and blah blah blah. And sure enough, you know, they're now down to like 4 nanometer technology. You know, nobody ever said that they thought that they would get below 1 nanometer in terms of that there. I remember when 10 nanometers, and that's the size of the gates on the that there. But the smaller the number is, the smaller the chip, the more transistors you can fit in onto a piece of silicon, and the faster it can go. That there, chips get faster, 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 smaller, 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 right there. So, that there, communications has said the same thing because the communications field shares a lot of the same technology. Now, I should point out, you know, where am I at on time here? That Moore's law and microprocessor technology and all of this required a large amount of cash to develop over the years. And this was done predominantly in the 70s and early 80s, which was toward the end of the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. So the person or the group that financed probably 90% of the R&D was probably the U.S. Department of Defense. So I know that hating Americans is a great thing, and I hate our current president back there. I didn't vote for him. That there, you know, that'll be posted everywhere that I don't like Donald Trump. That there, and I don't like a lot of what the military's done. And you know, and I wore a uniform for a number of years. You know, I'll admit that I was in the Air Force for 4 years. And then I played Army Reservist National Guard for another 5 years. So, and the National Guard in the U.S. is a little different because they're ready reserves. They could activate it and send overseas a lot. That there. So, you know, and I spent a number of years in Europe in the military. So, I'm very familiar with the U.S. military, and I have plenty of reasons to dislike them. That there. I won't go into it, but that there. But regardless, they brought us cell phones. They brought us HD TV. They brought us GPS. They brought us everything that your generation takes for granted was really an outgrowth of money spent in the military and the space program. And the space program was actually a part of the defense program. I mean, most missiles are designed to carry weapons and not satellites. Most rockets are designed with military goals and most satellites are actually designed with military and intelligence gathering capability more than they are on relaying TV shows from the U.S. to Malaysia, or routing internet traffic around the world, or helping you find your way around a traffic jam in KL. I mean, GPS was developed to steer missiles to their targets and help that there. So actually it wasn't even open to the civilian population until probably 15, 20 years after GPS came out. And the only reason GPS was released to the public was because of the Russia shooting down a South Korean airliner that strayed over Russian territory. And then the government, U.S. government decided, well, we got this really great tool that would help pilots not be where they're not supposed to be, so let's go ahead and flip the switch and open it up. So then after that, the entire GPS world came out, because if it wasn't for military satellites for weapons delivery purposes, there wouldn't be a GPS system. So you could throw your Waze in the trash, it would disappear. And honestly, they could shut that off tomorrow. That's still a military-owned commodity. these your navigational satellites. So it could be turned off tomorrow, that there. But I don't think it will be. I mean, the world is dependent. The economy would, internet, economies that rely on that would completely crumble right there. So, but again, communications field, cell phones also is part of that. So the plumage that there, so in information revolution, I actually did not get very far in these slides. I get sidetracked too often. We'll try not to let that happen too much. So, okay. Let me just kind of jump in here a little bit. And I'm going to jump to this picture first. Oh, he doesn't show the picture. Right there. Okay, well, in figure 1.1.1, which is not shown here, but he says there's different logical units. But basically, a computer has got one part here, which we're going to call the CPU, right there. It's got some input units. Now, inputs mean different things for different applications. So I'm going to call this input. We've got some output right there, and I'm going to probably stop with this slide right here, this particular slide. We'll go through the rest of these on Wednesday in July. As long as my wife gets through surgery and is healthy, after surgery tomorrow, then I'll be here on Wednesday. And then we've got over here, we've got what's called storage right there. And inside here, we also have some memory right there. This is our working memory right there. Our inputs right here, and again, my handwriting is what it is right there. Our inputs, if you're looking at a computer system, is typically the keyboard, the mouse, and maybe a camera, possibly a scanner, something like that. Those are our inputs. Our outputs are typically speakers and a monitor right there. Again, occasionally it might be something like a DVD burner or something like that there. Our storage is typically our hard drives right there. That there. Thumb drives would fall under this, CD-ROMs would fall under DVD-ROMs. DVD-ROMs and CD-ROMs are kind of disappearing because thumb drives or flash drives or whatever you call that, pen drives, they have a million different names depending on what part of the world you are in. I don't know what's used here versus U.S. versus Europe out there, but your little the little thumb-shaped drives that you plug into the USB port right there. Those have pretty much wiped out the need for DVDs and CDs. I still have friends that insist on downloading movies and burning them in DVDs and putting them on a shelf, and I say, why the heck do you do that? Because you stick your DVD into your computer and play it on the computer anyway. Do that there. But regardless, that there. The CD or the CPU also has some memory inside of it, and that's the working memory. The two of those are not related to each other completely, but they are. We'll go into more detail. But where they are related to each other is if you don't have enough working memory in your CPU, the CPU will quite often use the hard drive as virtual memory. And when that starts happening, your CPU gets very, very slow. And that's why those of you that have computers with only, say, 2 gig of RAM, you complain and whine and cry about how slow those things are, right? And that's because it's always going back and accessing your hard drive to read things that are inside that would normally be on the motherboard or the working memory of the computer. I've got my development machine I keep at home, Big Bertha, and Big Bertha's looks like something from the dark ages. It's about this tall and about this wide, and I got 32 gig of RAM in that thing. I don't want to be waiting for that thing to be swapping stuff. But I'm editing videos. I'm running Linux on it. I'm running Apple OS. I'm running 2 or 3 virtual machines doing development work on that thing. So that's it. If we're talking an embedded system, and I promise I'll wrap up after this because I got to get to the hospital and see what you have out there. Inputs on a desktop computer normally contain keyboards, mice, and cameras. In an embedded system, they may contain things such as temperature sensors. water levels, humidity levels, moisture levels. Sky's the limit out there on what out there. They may include things such as wind speed out there. It may include things such as oxygen levels out there. The computer system that controls the electronic ignition for your automobile. And most cars today have electronic ignition. I drive a little Vespa when I'll be allowed to after they have let me get on my Vespa since my stroke. That's there. Something about my balance. You're afraid I'm going to fall over. That there, that's one of the. But regardless, it's got electronic ignition, so it's got to have an oxygen sensor to measure the amount of oxygen in the air, so it knows how much to open up the choke. That there, and all these things are inputs to the CPU of an embedded system. The outputs of an embedded system may include things such as transmission on your motorcycle. A Vespa's got a continuous transmission that's electronically controlled, so I don't have to shift gears on it. That's why I will never pass the driving test, because I don't know how to shift a motorcycle, and I don't care to learn. I don't need to. I drive a scooter. That there. So, they finally came out with an automatic license for cars for people that don't want to learn how to shift gears on a car. That there. I'm kind of that way with my scooter. That there. So, but I just use it for a few things. But the outputs, the percentage of the engine power to route to the rear wheels of the motorcycle is, that's an output of the microprocessor, the actuator to control that transmission. Same thing with a modern BMW or Mercedes or that there, most cars such as, I've got a little also that I drive minivan. It's got a standard 3 or 4 speed transmission that the computer tells it when to shift gears. So its output for the transmission is just a binary number between 0 and 3 to tell what gear to be in. Well, actually 0 and 4, because neutral is a gear as well. Right there. So, but regardless, but the output is the transmission. The output is the throttle of how much petrol to shoot into the fuel injectors of the engine. Those are outputs. The amount of energy to send to the microwave oven, Megatron on the microwave oven, which converts, electric energy into microwave ovens in order to cook your food. That is an output of the computer system in the microwave oven. The fan speed going to this HVAC is a output of the computer system controlling the. So outputs mean different things to embedded people. So for this class, we're just going to treat it as monitor, printer, speakers, but from my world, it's completely different. I mean, it contains far more than just a few things right there. So, okay, let me disregard that. And you're free to leave, but I need to